Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the Vinnie Langdon Show. We are not at a concert, I'm sorry, but we are at some place a lot cooler. Yep. Terry, nice to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you.
All right, so tell us, where are we at here?
You're at the Travis Air Force Museum, Travis Air Force Base Air Museum here at Travis Air Force Base.
Yeah. So is that, open to the public? Is you have to be, part of the service to come here, or what?
No, actually, civilians are more than welcome to come in, but we do have to have them stop at the visitor center and make sure that all adults present a photo ID, and then, of course, any vehicle you bring on has to have proof of insurance and current registration. Then we have an escort that can bring people on. Yeah. We're open on Tuesdays through Saturdays, 9 to 4, so we're happy to accommodate and bring civilians in. So military ID is not required.
There we go. Nice. Now, at the Travis Air Show, I came out here and it was open, and I was just fascinated with all the history that you guys have here. Now, tell us, when did this project start? How is this new? Has this been here since the base started, or what?
Well, the charter kind of went out back in 1982, and one of our board members was tasked to start a museum here at Travis. And so the museum has been here for quite a while, since 1982, or I should say it started. Mm-hmm. And then in 1986, they actually opened up the museum. The first 4 years are spent collecting artifacts, and then opened to the public. This is an old commissary. They came in here, tore it all apart, started building displays, bringing in these aircraft, and so they had a great big undertaking, but they did a wonderful job.
So you're talking about all these artifacts that these people are going to be seeing in a little bit. Now, do they all belong to Travis? Are they from, parts of the history and war, and did they come from other places, or is it all just, locally?
Well, it comes from about everywhere you mentioned. People donate. There are items from the National Museum of the Air Force, because in all actuality, when a person donates to the Travis Museum here, it really becomes a property of the National Museum of the Air Force. But it comes from people who served. It comes from their children. There are times that we'll go out and look for items if we're building a particular display. Mm-hmm. And if we have something in mind, we can also ask the National Museum if in their storage they might have an artifact that we need. Right. So all different sources.
Yeah. Now, are there any artifacts out there if people are watching and they might say, hey, I have a book, or I have, a photo of an aircraft, and they want to bring it in, is there something that you guys are going, hey, we don't have anything on this?
Well, what our collection focuses around is Travis Air Force Base. Right. Now, Travis goes back to 1942-43, when it was the Fairfield Sassoon Army Air Corps base. Yes. But our focus is on the history of Travis airlift, and plus not known much is that Strategic Air Command was here in the 50s through about 1968. So that's our focal point, is on airlift history and the history of Travis.
Right. So Terry, we see these little parachutes. Is that a Hershey bar?
That is a Hershey bar. These Hershey bars with the little parachutes tied to them is a major factor in winning over the German people and showing them that we were their friends and no longer their enemies. Now Colonel Halverson, he was like a young lieutenant, I believe, or a captain at the time, and he was flying into Berlin on the Berlin airlift. And what he did was he took and got some Hershey bars and made handkerchief parachutes and threw them out the window to the children towards the end of the runways as they watched the airplanes come in. Well, this sparked great big momentum back here in America, where kids were saving up their allowances, candy companies were donating candy, and they were handing it out to the German children. And as I mentioned, this went a long, long ways in healing our relationship with Germany after the war, because we had gone through 2 world wars in less than 50 years with Germany. Right. But this was just a monumental step in the restoration of our relationships.
There you go. And now you guys know why there's Hershey bars in the parachutes. All right, so let's keep walking. And you said this is probably your favorite part of the museum that we're going to see today. And tell us why. What is it?
Well, I have many favorite parts, to be quite honest. I enjoy the entire
Favorite
museum.
means one, but you can have a million.
It's like a mother trying to pick a child. It really isn't possible.
So the Berlin aircraft lift.
The Berlin airlift. this is kind of the cornerstone of strategic airlift. Back in 1948, Russia cordoned off the city of Berlin, and the only way in there to deliver supplies was through airlift. Well, the Allies and the American government were not going to let Berlin fall to the communists, and so they created an air bridge, flying in all the necessary basics to sustain life, everything from coal, flour, milk, eggs, whatever it took to maintain Berlin and keep it going. The Allies and the Americans flew it in there. And in, let's see here, 1948, the German government put together a display that traveled through America. And their slogan, as you can see here, friends always, Freunden immer, if I pronounced it correctly. It's their way of saying thank you to us for what we did for Berlin. And the most amazing thing that I learned from the gentleman that came out here when we dedicated this is that it's not merely Berlin that appreciates what we did, it's the entire nation of Germany. So it's a special display for me.
One planet, love everybody, right?
There you go. One of the really interesting things about this particular display is that it does have the original artifacts from 1947-48. Original rolled oats, oatmeal, powdered milk, coffee, and you know, these things we haven't seen in decades, but this gentleman, Heinz Ries, was able to find these in Germany, some leftovers, put together a display, and we have them down here.
All right, let's go check it out.
It's everything from, powdered milk, coffee, baking Crisco, call it. It's all original, and it even has one of the original boxes that these items were shipped in. So, very proud of this.
Dry milk.
This aircraft, 1999, was actually here at Travis in 1961. So this airplane came home, and now she'll be saved and preserved for everyone to see and enjoy.
There you go. And you plan on doing that for some of the aircrafts that are already out here, that you're definitely going to just keep adding to them when they're ready to retire, just keep preserving them here?
Everybody keeps talking about, when are you going to get a C5? When are you going to get a C5? Well, I've spent 28 years approximately working on those airplanes. I'm a little leery, but what an incredible aircraft the C5 is. You know, she's done so much in her career, and one day hopefully everything will work out where we can get a C5 in here, because that's a big part of our Travis history.
There you go. Definitely. Let's go ahead and get a close-up of this here and talk more about it. I mean, this aircraft, what makes it so special is it just not, stayed here at Travis and did all these projects, but it's gone all over the world, right?
Exactly. This was our heavy airlifter before the C5 came online. This aircraft would fly oversized equipment, heavy equipment, all around the world. It flew helicopters, troops into Vietnam. It carried items for NASA. This aircraft was used in the Apollo program, where they would push it out the back of the aircraft to test the parachutes for when the Apollo capsule came back into the atmosphere. So once again, this airplane played many different roles. One of the first impressions of this airplane when I got on it up in Alaska, I went up to see it, it struck me as this was our first wide-body airplane. And that was back in '56 when she went into service.
Nice. Now we look at these aircrafts and they seem so large, and does that make it more difficult to fly and handle?
Well, flying and handling is not my specialty. Some airplanes, they might be large, but the pilots will say that she flies like a dream, she's easy to handle. And other airplanes that are big and heavy, pilots will say, you got to fly that thing every second. You fight with it. As far as from a maintainer and a restoration point of view, the bigger the airplane is, the harder it is to maintain it and restore it, and high lifts and more surface to take care of and work on corrosion control. Because our goal is to preserve these airplanes, and that's one of the big things we always fight is corrosion. This B-52 696, it was flown in here, and that was its last mission. She came in, shut down her engines, and she's been here ever since the mid-'80s. Interesting, one of our volunteers, Ken Cox, He actually worked on this airplane and crew chiefed it, so it brings a lot of memories back for him.
Right.
That special tie-in.
And do you ever get the desire to go, hey, I wonder if, this aircraft's been sitting here for 10, 15 years. I wonder if it will start up, and you go in there and try to start it up?
No, all aircraft here are non-operational according to the Air Force instructions that we cannot have an operating aircraft. So, nope, they've all been demilitarized, their fluids have been drained, any kind of explosive devices have been removed, so they're pretty inert.
Nice.
Interesting thing about this B-29 Miss America 62 is quite often museums will take an aircraft and they'll paint it up like a particular one from World War II or Korea, whatever era.
Right.
Well, this B-29 is the real, genuine, actual Miss America 1962. So, once again, it's just another unique item that we have here. This is a real deal here.
Nice.
That really did fly missions in World War II. The bombing missions that are marked with the little bombs on the side of the aircraft, the mines, and the 2 airplanes that it shot down. That's all real. This airplane really did that.
Now, you see a lot of planes, they have a lot of the whole pinup theme. They have pinup chicks on a lot of these planes. And do you have any idea of why they did that?
Because they were red-blooded American boys with raging hormones.
So what is the B-29 mostly used for?
Well, it was used as a bomber, but the airplane is most noted for dropping the first and second atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II out in the Pacific on Japan that brought the war finally to a close. So that's basically its claim to fame. But the airplane really was also much more versatile in its bombing missions, its weather recon. It flew well after World War II into Korea. It served many purposes. The 50th anniversary of the Korean War display. The interesting thing is that by the time the Korean War had kicked off, David Grant Hospital had been built up on the hill here. And this was one of the major receiving points for all the wounded from the Korean War. So Travis, has an incredibly rich history of helping our servicemen who have been wounded in like Korea, in Vietnam. And David Grant is growing into one of the premier hospitals in the Air Force. But as mentioned, during the Korean War, this base flew an incredible amount of airlift support for that operation, and also it was a receiving center for the wounded as well.
Nice. So let's go ahead and we'll show you guys what they have in here. Now, it's always fascinating is, in school you always read all these things, but it's totally different when you actually see it in person and you go, wow, those are the exact same planes, those, the replicas and even the realistic things, and you go, wow, that's amazing. So
it is. It takes it from kind of an abstract in a book and it puts it into a more tangible, real realm, if you want to call it that. It's such as the pilot's helmet, the oxygen mask. Then we can really start associating it with something. It's not quite so abstract, as I say, as in a book.
Right.
So.
Great.
As mentioned, Travis was, once again, a jump-off point into the Korean War for supplies and moving troops. It was also the receiving center for our wounded. Once they'd been treated and their wounds were stabilized, then they would be brought here and treated at the David Grant facility. So much so that there was a movie made a little bit later called Starlifter. And it had basically the stars of the day. And we have a movie poster showing people like James Cagney, Danny Kaye, just on and on.
Right.
So we got a little bit of celebrity status after that.
There you go. So we see some of these engines. Some of them can fit in your hand, and some of them can fit in big aircraft.
Museum only. One of the interesting things about the engine room here is that we have a TF-39 engine here that goes on a C5. Right next to it, we have a Whittle. It was built under contract by General Electric, but this is one of the very early jet engines built in the first part of World War II and used as a test bed developing jet power. Interesting thing about this is that we're talking from about 1942, 3, 4 to 1969 when the C-5 flew. So we are talking really no more than about 35 years from this small little centrifugal flow jet engine to this monster. And what's so amazing is just that short time span and how fast the technology jumped. And we have a comparison here between the two. And the other interesting thing about the original jet engines is that this was all done on slide rules. There were no computers. There was no program to help anybody.
Comes from here and
ends out from the mind, and from a slide rule. So you can just see the advancements in technology in just such an incredibly short time. This Liberty engine down here is an engine that was used in World War I and up through about 1934. Now this is kind of once again at the birth of aviation. So we have an inline engine here from World War I, about 1917-18, and then in a matter by 1950, basically about 35 years later, we have what's called a 4360 engine, and it's a pinnacle of radial engine and piston engine development. And once again, it was done in this incredibly short time of about 35, 38 years. You got to remember that all this is technology from like 1917, 18, 1920, the valves, the sleeves, the cooling, the rocker arms, everything. And this is really, state of the art for the day. And it is really incredible that they were able to produce such a wonderful engine at that time.
And they knew what they were doing.
Oh, they knew exactly what they were doing with the Liberty engine. But even more so, as I mentioned, by about 35, 37 years later, you hit the pinnacle of piston engines, and that's with the 4360 down here. This engine became one of the most powerful piston-driven engines right here. Pratt & Whitney developed this started developing it in around about 1942-43. And here we have a 28-cylinder engine. And they basically, in essence, took two engines and married them together. And once again, no computers, all from your mind and from a slide rule. They developed this engine. Now, this is one of the great engines of World War II. Incredibly rugged engine. A P-47 pilot fighting in Europe. He was in a dogfight with a German aircraft, and they were heading it straight at each other, firing away. And the pilot said all of a sudden his plane just started violently shuddering and vibrating. And he was able to limp it back home and land it. And what they had realized and found was that a German shell had hit one of the cylinders here and blown the cylinder off. Wow. But yet the engine and airplane were able to keep flying and bring the pilot home. That's how robust and sturdy the R-2800s were.
Nice. Now, looking at all these engines, and we always see the planes up in the air now, and we think, okay, well, maybe they're loud. Some are louder compared to others. Is that because of just the engine alone?
No, you have your exhaust manifolds or exhaust stacks. For example, the B-25 had real short exhaust stacks, and so it was extremely loud inside of the crew compartment, where other airplanes, the exhaust pipes might have been a little bit longer, and so it's a bit quieter, and the engines were further out away from the cockpit. This is Bob right here, and he's working on a T-34. This engine was on the C-133 aircraft, and it was one of the very early turboprop aircraft. And as mentioned earlier, this airplane helped, NASA called it the first step into space. And we're very fortunate that we do have a C-133 here, and these are the engines that powered that aircraft. And once again, Bob is doing his magic on tearing the entire engine down, taking and polishing out every nut and bolt, taking every piece, repainting it, and it is truly better than new.
And how long has he been working on this for?
Well, the J57 took a year, and this will probably take about a year or so as well. Nice. But his work is absolutely impeccable.
Now, there's people like Bob that come out here and they work on all these projects. Now, if there's people out there that got a lot of time on their hands, and they need to come out here and they want to feel like they want to help up and keep everything up to date, are they welcome to do that?
Oh, they're more than welcome. You don't have to have a diverse background in aircraft maintenance. We appreciate volunteers at every skill level because I think every person brings something to the table and they make the difference here in the museum. So if people do want to come out and volunteer, they just give us a call. We'll set up a time where they can come out. We'll show them what we have and what we do. And if they're interested, we give them a volunteer packet and we'll get them a pass, and then they can roll up their sleeves and dive in.
Nice. You want to work on an engine? Contact them now.
This is our space exhibit area. And Travis has always had a long history of supporting NASA. As mentioned, we had the C-133. Only 2 bases had that aircraft in approximately the late 50s through about 72, Travis and Dover. Being on the West Coast, we would pick up items from Southern California, boosters, satellites, and then we would take them over to the Cape and deliver them. One of our interesting artifacts here is a couple of engines for the Titans.
Nice.
So usually people are pretty impressed when they see how big these Titan motors are and how much thrust is developed by them. So.
Right. Especially going to space, you have to have a lot more thrust than some of these aircrafts.
A considerable amount, amount. Yes, absolutely. So, well, probably one of the most interesting stories I heard from a loadmaster of a C-133, African-American gentleman. He said that, flying out of Travis and delivering components for the space race, going into Florida, there were times that he was not permitted to leave the base for his own safety because of the civil riots, civil unrest, and all the race riots back in the mid-'60s. And it's so ironic that this gentleman was helping us win the space race, but yet he couldn't leave base. There was such a sense of inequity there.
Now, you were talking about a relationship between NASA and the Air Force, and how close is that, and how different are they?
Well, the closeness is that many of the satellites, components, and what have you are produced here in Southern California during the 60s and what have you. So Travis, we'd fly down there, we'd pick up the parts and components, we'd fly them over to Cape Canaveral, Cape Kennedy, and then they'd be assembled and shot into space. As mentioned, only 2 bases had the C-133, and NASA did call that the first step into space because it could carry these oversized components for NASA. So that airplane really did help us win the space race in the very early days.
There you go.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space.
So we're looking and we have the Mercury, the Gemini, the Apollo, and a lot of people know the Apollo from Apollo 13 and all these movies.
Mm-hmm.
And, what are the differences between, there are different missions, different places?
You see, the Mercury program was really our first steps into space. We were learning about space and, how man fits into space and his endurance. And then we went to the Gemini project, which was behind me, which was a 2-man project. And all this was leading up to the Apollo, which was ultimate goal to take man to the moon and bring him back safely. And we're very fortunate here that we have what would be called maybe some lobby models. Because back in the day, a manufacturer may have a big, about 1/16 scale model or 1/8 scale model of the product they were producing, and this is a couple of them right here.
So with time and history, everything changes, and Travis Air Force Base had its changes and looks and all that fun stuff. Different buildings are being added all the time, and you have some photographs over here of maybe what people want to see what Travis looked like when it first started.
Absolutely. We have kind of a set of display cases that show the chronological history of Travis Air Force Base. And starting here in 1943, we were pretty much a air transport is what we were. That's what we started as.
Right.
But as mentioned, we did have the Navy here with their carrier painted on one of the runways, the outline of.
Right. You were talking earlier, it wasn't even called Travis because it was located in, Fairfield, Sassoon. That's where we are. And it was called the Fairfield Sassoon.
Moving on over here, you can see the original layout. And there are actually the 3 very big hangars there in the photograph. One of them still does exist here at Travis. I myself, I arrived here in December of '85, and I've seen an incredible change in this base of how it's growing, how it's honestly improved. They're always improving this base and adding to it. But it's also really neat is when one of these 3 hangars got torn down, the construction people found some B-29 manuals in the walls, and I was told they brought them over here to the museum, and now they're in our library.
Nice.
You never know what you're going to find in the walls.
Hey. All right.
Yeah. I'd mentioned that during the Berlin airlift, starting about 1948, Strategic Air Command came to Travis and was here until about 1968, and this represents our time period through 1959. And it was in that time period that General Travis was flying out on a B-29, and it crashed, unfortunately, and he was killed in it along with many others. And thus, approximately a year later, the base was renamed in his honor. So. Also, one of our older uniforms, the tans. In this display case, we highlight pretty much our Vietnam era. Once again, Travis was the jump-off point for the Pacific. This base was a 24-hour-day operation. This base never slept. We also received the incoming troops once again who had done their tour in Vietnam. We received in the wounded as well. Once they'd been stabilized overseas, they'd be flown in for further treatment at David Grant. And so this is a very important and big part of our history here.
And then soon, in 10, 20 years, you'll probably have another case right here for this.
We're due for another case. We need to do from 2000 up through 2010, and that is going to probably sit right in the center of all this, and it's going to reflect our missions that we've been involved in, the Afghanistan, 9/11, the Iraqi war. So we'll start covering that because that's becoming history.
Right.
As time passes. So we need to honor those people as well.
Exactly. There we go. Well, there is a lot more to see, and all you guys have to do is come out here. And what else is going to be added to this museum?
Our big goal right now is to build a new museum up at the front of the base. Unfortunately, right now, due to security measures and 9/11, it is difficult to get into the base, but not impossible. To better serve the public and the community of the Air Force, we're going to build a new museum at the front of the base that will have public access, so there will be no security issues. Our foundation board, the Jimmy Doolittle Air and Space Museum Education Board, is raising funds right now for that new museum. So we're really excited about that because we're looking at more of a state-of-the-art contemporary museum.
Nice. And that would be good for, the local schools around here, to do field trips and families, Boy Scouts, anyone that wants to come out. It'd be a lot easier.
Well, one of our important elements in this new museum is to have classrooms so that children can come out here and learn about, our aviation heritage, history of America, even science classes about, here's the physics and why an airplane flies. It's all science.
There you go.
So we're going to be accommodating the school children.
Terry, thanks so much.
Well, thank you for coming.
All right. And if people want more information, there's a phone number, a website people can contact you guys at?
Well, our phone number here is area code 707-424-5883. And then, of course, if you Google in Travis Air Museum or Jimmy Doolittle Air and Space Museum Foundation, you'll find us.
All right. It was a fun, exciting trip. Now I'm going to get out of here and maybe hop in a plane and get out of the country for a couple days. See ya. guys, if you enjoyed the show, you were educated, you have more comments, or you want to see this show again, check out my website, VinnieLangdonShow.com. Follow me on Twitter at Vinnie Langdon, Facebook.com/Vinnie Langdon Show. Join the page to find out more about what else I'm up to. So we'll see you guys next time on the Vinnie Langdon Show, and we'll see you later.